Welcome back. It's a common hypothetical. What would you do if you were a king or queen for a day? Well, some people actually take it further than others. So-called micronations have been around for decades. They're not legally recognized and have no material power, but at least one recently formed one is drawing tourists to a few acres deep in California's desert. A 40-something radio DJ in San Diego has become the Sultan of SLOWJAMASTAN. Yes, you heard that right. It's a tongue-in-cheek exercise with laws banning things like Crocs and biting directly into a piece of string cheese. As fun as individual micronations can be, this one sounds like a lot of fun. They raise questions about what is or isn't a country and how international laws can be bent or broken. Amanda Ulrich is a freelance writer who went to SLOWJAMASTAN to report on a story published in The Guardian, and she joins us now from San Diego, about 100 miles away from that micronation. Thanks for being with us, Amanda. In your Guardian article last year, you asked this question, so let's start there. What is and what is not a country?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. The kind of idea of a micronation is a state that is kind of asserting its sovereignty and saying it's sovereign, but doesn't really have any legal basis for that, as you said. So it's not recognized as being sovereign. But a lot of these places like SLOWJAMASTAN still have their own laws, their own rules. A lot of them, again, as you said, are very tongue-in-cheek. So they're kind of, as I've seen studies describe it, they're kind of mimicking these acts of statehood, either by the ways they're dressing or the laws that they have in place. So there are places like SLOWJAMASTAN and, roughly 100 or so other micronations that kind of vary in shape and size. But that's kind of the general outline of micronation.
And you spent some time in SLOWJAMASTAN. Tell us what that was like.
Yeah, definitely. So a couple years ago, I was working in Palm Springs, working for the local newspaper there, started getting some tips about this place called SLOWJAMASTAN, about an hour south of Palm Springs. And at the time, there were just kind of these signs in the sand that were describing SLOWJAMASTAN, saying, this stands outside of the U.S. Obviously, that's going to be very interesting for local residents and for people in general. So when I went out to SLOWJAMASTAN and did this story for The Guardian last summer, there's not a whole lot out there. There are no permanent residents. It's in this very desolate swath of the California desert. So it's a lot of sand. There's a security booth there, and then, some fencing and barbed wire, but you can easily just step around. So a lot of this, is very funny and amusing for people, is the idea of this place in the middle of the desert that is calling itself a micronation. So I think people are drawn to it either from that kind of jokey side, or, for some people, it's a very real thing of, wanting to step outside of whatever place or country that they're in, even if that can't really become a reality for them. I think that's a huge appeal for people.
So SLOWJAMASTAN sounds pretty fun. No Crocs, no feet on the dashboard. I'm out already there. But there are also real-world consequences here to micronations. What are those impacts?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the micronation. So SLOWJAMASTAN in particular, when Randy Williams, the guy who calls himself the Sultan of SLOWJAMASTAN, started it, he kind of sent this declaration of independence to the UN and to Biden, saying that he was declaring sovereignty of SLOWJAMASTAN and that they would cooperate with the United States except for taxes and laws of the US, which is not really a threat on his part. That's just kind of asserting himself as wanting to be this kind of thought experiment in a way. But there are lots of examples of other micronations, one in particular that's kind of on a plot of land between Croatia and Serbia. And kind of one of their main tenets is voluntary taxes. And they may not be legally recognized yet, but that is something that they take seriously and is something that they mention frequently, of being this place that has voluntary taxes.
Glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you about this place next. It's called Liberland, and they hope to be a tax haven. They already have hundreds of thousands of people applying for citizenship. I mean, do you see that coming to fruition?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that the whole idea of this world building, micronation building, is kind of an act in itself. There are conventions where different micronations from around the world come together and kind of discuss the origin stories of their different countries. And it's called MicroCon. That's the one that happens in the US every year. I think it's very hard to say if that idea of, in that particular case, of being tax-free could really happen. Somewhere like Slowjamistan, there are no permanent residents. But the fact that there are now roughly 18,000 online citizens of Slowjamistan shows that there's really this interest from people, whether it's they kind of are looking at this as a daily, a fun escape from their day-to-day lives, or they're really viewing this as, they want to step outside, even if it's just online, to a place that kind of exists outside of government borders. I think that's really appealing to people.
All right, Amanda Ulrich, thank you so much for joining us tonight, giving us a taste of life in Slowjamistan. Just a quick shout out to my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Brinkman, who had us make our own governments, and my country was called Panzipar. So start brainstorming what you're going to name your country, Amanda.
Exactly. Amanistan. I don't know. I'll have to think about that one, but Slowjamistan is pretty good.
Amanistan, I like it. All right, thank you for your time. It's still ahead. Boeing